My name is Isa. I'm one of the therapists at Cache Valley Counseling. And the subject I want to talk about today is one that is pretty popular in just in the media and the mental health world. And so a lot of you might know about it or hear about it, but I thought I'd just kind of review what it is. And that is Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. So again, I feel like a lot of people have heard this term or, go around of what, these 5 love languages are. And I just kind of wanted to review them today. It's something that we sometimes use in therapy. It's not necessarily considered its own like model of therapy specifically, but it's a theory that this researcher Gary Chapman came up with and has been very helpful in the very least in being able to articulate and describe the potential different ways that people, whether that's couples or maybe between friends or parents and children, the different ways that people experience love, and by experience I mean specifically he differentiates it into the ways that people like to receive and give love, and learning that about our significant others, our partners, and whomever, in order to better be in tune with one another and giving people love the way that they feel like they need it. So one element of it, we're gonna pull up my resources here on the side that I've got. So just a little overview. Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages, it's a popular book and explores the concept of, again, different ways that people express, receive love in relationships. It was first published in 1992, and it's become pretty widely recognized as this, framework for understanding and improving relationships. And so Chapman, he suggests that there are 5 primary love languages that, globally, that each person might experience, and that most people have a dominant love language or two that they best like to perceive and experience or give love through that language. And so coming to understand your own love language, and specifically your partners or significant other or anyone else in your life, their love languages, can help to improve communication and strengthen emotional bonds and enhance overall like the quality of your relationship, and just what that's like. Because when people feel like they are receiving love in ways that make sense to them and feel like love to them, then that is helpful and more beneficial compared to when they're not, and when they feel like that's not happening, and when they're not receiving loves in ways that make sense to them. So really quick, we're just going to kind of go over the 5 love languages that Gary Chapman specifically talks about in his book. So first, the first one he lists is called words of affirmation. So this is the notion that people love, they feel loved and appreciated when they receive verbal affirmation of essentially how important you are in somebody else's life, right? So this could be compliments, this could be words of encouragement, expressions of affection, simple phrases like "I love you" or "you mean a lot to me." Those things carry significant weight. Specifically, especially I think in beginnings of relationships, there's this need to feel like reassured about, hey, I care about you, I'm attracted to you, I want to be committed to you, I want to be in this relationship with you. It's these words that, again, kind of confirm for you that the person cares about you, that you're a priority. It's not, it's language that is expressing care, concern, encouragement, reassurance, whatever that looks like. And so it's more than just talking. That's one thing that can be confused for people. When I was younger, I used to just think that words of affirmation meant, oh, my love language is talking. And even though that can be part of it, it's not just, oh, we're just talking and having conversations about any random, subject, even though that can be a form of love, which would probably maybe fit under another language. But specifically, again, words of affirmation is about expressions that affirm the person's importance, priority in your life, whatever that looks like, right? So that's number 1. Number 2 would be acts of service. So for people with this love language, it's a kind of that idea that like actions speak louder than words, right? So people feel the most loved when their partner or loved one, whoever it is, performs an act of service. So that could be things like cooking or cleaning, doing household chores, helping with tasks, just doing things that facilitate that person's life, right? Making their life easier. It's demonstrating thoughtfulness and consideration, and just like, hey, I was thinking about you, so I did this thing because I thought it would help. I thought it would be helpful to you. I thought it would be nice. So that's acts of service. This one is one that I'm very familiar with in my personal life because my mother is someone who's very acts of service oriented. That is definitely her primary love language, both giving and receiving. Which sometimes we talk about how typically, oftentimes people will have the same love language as something they like to give and receive, but sometimes that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes like they prefer to give love a certain way and receive it a different way, which can happen. But anyway, but my mother is someone who really loves to give and receive acts of service. So growing up, I knew that she loved me through acts of service, right? And on the other end too, like the easiest way to show my mother that I loved her, to make her happy, was to make her life easier, whatever that looked like, right? So I picked up on this really quickly as I, was growing up, that if I just, when I came home from school or something, if I just, did my chores, or, helped with dinner, or did anything that would essentially make my mom's life easier and be a service to her, that meant the world to her, more than potentially getting her flowers, or buying her a gift of any kind, or telling her that I loved her, even though I'm sure she enjoyed hearing it. Nothing hit home to her as much as, hey mom, I have dinner ready so you don't have to worry about it, or I did this thing to make your life easier. So that was a big one that I was very, very conscious of growing up, because that was my mother's primary love language. And on that similar point, I think it can be easy to discover, maybe potentially, or to identify one's love language by noticing what is most distressing to be without as well. So for, again, with my mother as this example, it was very distressing for her when we didn't do this, when we didn't have acts of service as something that we were doing. So for example, growing up, she always argued a lot with my sister, for example, because my sister very rarely did her bed. And to my sister, she didn't understand, like, why is this a big deal? Like, who cares? It's my bed, it's my bedroom. Why does this matter? But to my mother, who, was really cared about cleanliness and all these things, it was almost disrespectful to her as a person that my sister wasn't making her bed. And that was an area of contention, of conflict between the two of them. And when my sister would do these things, then she would be really, really grateful. And so anyway, that's just an example to illustrate that sometimes we can identify what our love language is by noticing what is distressing to not have, to go without. So anyway, but moving on to the next one. The third one that Gary Chapman lists here is receiving gifts. So for some people, they feel the most loved when they are receiving thoughtful gifts from the people they love. And that doesn't need to necessarily be extravagant or expensive, but it's more about reflecting thought and consideration and effort. And so that act of giving and receiving gifts symbolizes love and appreciation. I have my cousin's wife. She's a family member of ours, and she's incredibly good at gift giving. This is like, she's really good at the gifts thing is one of her primary love languages. So every year when like Christmas comes around, she always comes up with the most thoughtful things. Like, she's like, oh, because I know you and each person in our family, she knows like every person's personality and what they specifically like, and she gets things that are so individualized, and so unique, and it's always very meaningful, and we're like, wow, like, that's so thoughtful, thank you, that's super cool, as compared to maybe someone that brought a present that wasn't as considerate or thoughtful. But all to say that for her, this cousin, or cousin's wife of mine, she feels very like it's something that she really cares about, is to be able to give gifts that seem very thoughtful and meaningful. And when she receives them, that's also, again, a big deal to her. So that's that example. And this could also maybe potentially include things like writing notes to each other, like leaving a cute, loving sticky note in someone's bag. Like, it's this idea of like, I made something physical or whatever to remember you by, or to show you that I love you, right? And then the fourth one that's described is quality time. So quality time, when that's your primary love language, that's usually you really value spending focus and undivided attention with your partner, or loved one, whoever that is, right? And so that can look like anything, honestly. That could be having meaningful conversations and shared experiences. It's simply about being present with people and making them feel loved and cherished because you're giving them your attention and you're choosing to spend time with them in when you could be spending time elsewhere or with other people, right? And this could look very different for different people. For example, for some people, watching TV could be really great quality time, and for some people, it could not be. So, for example, if watching TV means that you're sitting on the couch and you're not interacting at all, and you don't feel connected, and you feel like, oh well, there's nothing going on here, then maybe that's not the best example of quality time, right? That might not be a great activity to count as quality time. But for some people, maybe it is. I know in my family, that's a big deal. It's a really great form of quality time because like I'll sit down to watch a movie with my siblings. And when we watch, the way that we watch TV is very interactive between us. We will watch, but we'll also we'll comment, we'll pause and discuss things, we'll react together. And it's very much like this idea of like we are sharing this moment, we're sharing interests, and that is quality time for us. And so it's something that we love to do and it's hard when it goes without. Like sometimes if we, especially now as adults, like we don't necessarily live in the same house anymore, and so sometimes like months and months will go by that we haven't like sat and watched a movie together because we're out doing our own things, having our own careers. And so it's so fun to like get together and have a weekend and be like, oh, we're going to watch this movie together, and that's something we really cherish, and makes a difference, right? So that's quality time. And then the last one that Gary Chapman lists is physical touch. And so, physical touch, when that's your primary love language, you thrive on physical expressions of affection. And that can be romantic or sexual, or could not be, right? So, this could include things like hugs, kisses, holding hands, cuddling, which most of those have, like, again, maybe a romantic connotation to them, but not all of them. I remember as a child, I absolutely loved when I was able to like go sleep in my mom's bed with her, and we would just like cuddle in bed and just be there, just physically holding each other in bed. And that was so special to me. And especially because the older I got, the less it happened. And when my younger siblings were born, like they needed more attention. And so it's something that again I really cherished. And occasionally, even as an adult, in moments before some big transition in my life where I was like going to move away to college or something else, like I would tell my mom, like, could you sleep with me tonight? Could you come lay in bed with me? Because I'm gonna, I'm in this big emotional moment of leaving and moving away, and maybe I'm feeling anxiety about it. And what would be help me to feel loved and be reassuring is if you came and laid in bed with me and we could just like snuggle and talk. And so, that's one, a form of physical touch, right? Physical touch is, again, can be any small thing. It can be just like a reassuring, like, put your hand on your shoulder, or, and some people like it more than others. Some people really thrive on that and want it a lot. And they love to hug people. They love to be touched by people. And then some people really don't. Some people are not touchy-feely people. Sometimes it can be very uncomfortable for them. And that's can be a very interesting thing when you're in a relationship with someone who's very touchy, very, loves physical touch, and maybe another person who doesn't. And that might be an interesting dynamic that you need to negotiate and talk through, and figure out like what moments does this feel good or does it not feel good, and how much do you need and how much is comfortable. And even something we work through in therapy with a lot of people, is this idea of, physical touch. And specifically in therapy, we often work with couples in, talking about like sexual touch, right? And talking about like different levels of sexual desire and what that looks like, and negotiating that, because it's not easy necessarily to deal with that when you have people who have different levels of that need, right? So anyway, so those are kind of, again, going over what those different love languages are, what they're, what they mean, what they're like. And then a few different, thoughts on, once talk about those specific 5 different types, and what do you do with that there. And so Chapman's theory basically claims that understanding and speaking your partner's love language is essential for building a strong and fulfilling relationship. He emphasizes the fact that people often have different love languages, and that mismatching and expressing receiving love can, that doesn't match, it can lead to misunderstanding and conflict. But by identifying your partner's love language and making an effort to express love in their preferred way, you can foster a deeper and emotional connection and intimacy in your relationship. So what he's essentially saying here is that it doesn't matter what your love language is or what your partner's love language is, like whatever that looks like, and whether that naturally matches, like you naturally have similar ones or you naturally don't, the goal is to identify what the other person cares about and to identify what the other person needs, and strive, even if it might be kind of out of your comfort zone, to give love to your partner in ways that they need, as much as possibly can. And for both partners to be doing this, right? Because if only one person does it, then it feels like a bit of an unequal relationship, and that doesn't feel good. Excuse me. It doesn't feel good for anyone, because then it feels like one person is doing all the giving and isn't receiving anything, and that can be hard. But if both partners are doing this, then ideally you can, reach a place where everyone feels like their needs matter and their needs are being attended to. So anyway, it's also interesting to note that many individuals, beyond having a primary love language, they can also have secondary ones, and that this can change over time. Like you could be someone who really cares about words of affirmation at one point, and then maybe later and through your relationships or through life experiences, maybe that's not as important to you as, acts of service or physical touch. It's not something that is set in stone. Certainly it can be changeable, and it just kind of depends for what your life experiences are. Again, effective communication and a willingness to learn and adapt to each other's languages are key components of a healthy and successful relationship, and just being willing to have flexibility going forward, right? And then another thing that I think is really interesting to think about is the idea that there could also even be potentially other love languages than just these five, right? So again, Gary Chapman's theory names these five because they seem fairly universal, fairly like, they make sense to most people. But I think the concept of just find out what's important to your partner, discover that, and try to implement it and utilize it and take it in, I think that could be something that is applicable to anything. And so even in my own like therapy at times, or even in my personal life, I've even said that I feel like there could be a lot of different love languages beyond these other five, right? And so one thing for me personally that I've kind of been able to identify for myself over the years is this idea that a love language for me is sharing, like having shared interests with people. So for example, it matters a lot to me, means a ton to me when people in my life take interest in the things I'm interested in, right? Like if I'm reading a book, or if there's a movie that I really like and they come and like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, tell me more about that. Like, what's that about? And they're willing to engage in things that I enjoy with me, and ask questions and be curious and be there in that, enjoying the same sort of fun thing with me. That means the world. And that is so fun for me. And that is something that is a big deal to me. And maybe that can go into quality time, which I think it does overlap with that if you're spending time together doing that. But it could even be time spent apart, but still doing that. And one example for that is something that I did. And so this is like part of my giving love, that I give love in this way, right? Of being interested in other people's interests. One thing that I did back in when I was in my master's program. So I did my master's in Texas. That's where I got my master's in marriage family therapy. And down there, the cohort that I was in was made up primarily of people who had been born and raised in Texas. And several of the girls, especially in that cohort, were really into country music, right? And just this kind of Southern Texan culture. And that's not something I had a ton of exposure to, but it was something that like I saw that they enjoyed, and I saw how much they had fun with it. And so for me, part of becoming their friends and becoming close to them was feeling the need to enter their world in a way. And so for me, what I did at one point is I went to one of these girls and I gave them my like phone and just opened my Spotify and I said, "Hey, could you please create a country playlist for me? As long as you want, just tell me everything you like, put it on there, and I'm going to learn that music." And that's exactly what I did. I put that in, and I, spent the next, like, 2 years that I was living there. I would fairly frequently listen to this playlist, just all the time, and I learned all this country music that I was not aware of before. But it allowed me to enjoy listening to music with them in a way that wouldn't have been possible had I not, taken that interest. So anyway, that's just an example of something that, again, is not part of necessarily Gary Chapman's five love languages, but for me, that makes sense, right? Like, I show people that I love them by taking an interest in their interests, and I feel very loved when people do the same for me. Other potential, like, examples could be support, right? Like, oh, I feel loved when you support me in my endeavors and my dreams and my passions, and I support you. And anyway, there could be, again, a million different things of what that actually looks like. But I think the general concept and what, brings us home is something that is helpful to our relationships is this idea of being aware of ourselves, right? So, like, self-knowledge, insight of what is it that we want and like and need. And then also awareness and knowledge of our partners. And again, not just romantic partners, this goes for children, this go, parent-child relationships, this goes for friends. And just being aware of what you need and what the people around you need, and striving to both communicate what you need, ask for what you need, and take responsibility for that, as well as going out of your way the best you can to meet those needs for the people around you, and to do things that they would appreciate.